Julian Mercer dropped Clara's laptop shut like it had personally offended him, the sound sharp enough to make the dog flinch from across the room. "You're still doing this?" He didn't even look up from his phone. "Clara, it's been 2 years. This blog thing is not going anywhere." Clara Whitmore stood at the kitchen counter, her hands still dusted with flour, a pot of spiced apple chutney cooling on the stove behind her. She had been up since 5 in the morning testing the recipe. The light in the apartment was golden. She had been, until 30 seconds ago, genuinely happy. "The engagement numbers went up 40% this month," she said carefully. "Engagement." Julian said the word like it tasted wrong. "Engagement doesn't pay the hydro bill, Clara. Engagement doesn't explain to my colleagues why my wife runs a food blog instead of an actual career. It's not just a blog anymore. There are brands reaching out. Hobby brands." He finally looked at her, and what she saw in his face was worse than anger. It was embarrassment. "You know what Kristen said when I mentioned it at the office? She said her 12-year-old cousin does the same thing on TikTok. For fun." The name landed the way it always did lately, a small pointed thing. Clara set down the wooden spoon in her hand. "I need you to stop bringing Kristen's opinions into this kitchen," she said. "I need you to stop pretending this is a business." He picked up his jacket from the chair. "I have a dinner, don't wait up." He left at 6:30 on a Wednesday. He came back at 2 in the morning, and Clara was still awake at the table, editing photographs and not sleeping, though she told herself she wasn't waiting. He left for good on a Saturday in March, the kind of cold gray Saturday that Toronto does in early spring when the snow has turned to slush, but the sun has not yet decided to show up. He packed 2 bags, methodical, barely speaking. He'd been home less and less for 3 weeks by then, and some part of Clara had already understood what was happening. The way you understand a storm is coming before you even look at the sky. "Is it Kristen?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. That was, in its own way, an answer. "This was never the life I wanted," he said finally, zipping the second bag closed. "I wanted someone who was building something real. And instead I've spent 5 years watching you play house with a camera and a mixing bowl." Clara didn't cry. She stood in the doorway of the bedroom with her arms folded, and she looked at the man she had married, and she said, very quietly, "Then I guess you should go build something real." He walked out without looking back. She heard the elevator doors close, and then the building went silent, and then the dog padded over and pressed against her leg, and she stood there for a long time without moving. Her sister Fiona came that evening with Thai food and a bottle of wine, and the specific determination of someone who refuses to let you sit alone in your own wreckage. "He's an idiot," Fiona said. "He might not be wrong," Clara said, staring at her pad thai. "Clara." "About the blog, about the career thing." "Clara, look at me." Fiona waited until she did. "That chutney you made this morning made me rethink my entire relationship with apples. You are not a hobby." Clara almost laughed, almost. She gave herself 1 week to feel sorry about it. She cried in the shower, walked the dog longer than either of them needed, made 2 batches of shortbread she left in the hallway for her neighbors because she couldn't stop stress baking and didn't want to eat them alone. She let herself be sad in the way a person has to be when something breaks. And then she went back to work. The blog had started as a practical thing, a way to document the recipes she was developing, to keep notes on what worked and what didn't, but it had grown into something she hadn't planned on, a place where people actually came, thousands of them, then tens of thousands, for the kind of food that felt like home, honest recipes, seasonal ingredients, the kind of cooking that didn't require equipment most people didn't own, or ingredients most people couldn't pronounce. With Julian gone, she had time she hadn't had before. She started posting every day. She wrote the longer pieces she'd always put off. The essay about her grandmother's peerages, the one about learning to cook for one after her father passed. She shot everything in the pale morning light from her apartment window, and edited, late into the night, and told herself she was building something, even when she wasn't sure anymore what it was supposed to look like. She was also running out of money faster than she wanted to admit. The freelance income covered the rent, the utilities, the dog food. Groceries for recipe testing were the first thing she'd started calculating carefully. She began buying in smaller quantities, planning her testing around what was on sale at the St. Lawrence market, stretching a budget that didn't have much give left in it. One Saturday in April, she set up a small table at a neighborhood market on Roncesvalles, selling jars of the preserves she'd been making, the chutney, a smoked tomato jam, a blueberry compote with cardamom. It felt like a small humiliation to be there. She wasn't going to pretend otherwise, but the jars moved. An older man, 70 or so, with a white beard and a canvas bag from the public library, stopped at her table and bought 3 jars of the tomato jam. "My wife passed last year," he said, not unkindly, just honestly. "She was the cook. I've been eating badly ever since. He looked at the label Clara had designed herself. This looks like something she would have made. Clara thanked him. He came back 20 minutes later and bought 4 more. For the neighbors, he said. They've been bringing me casseroles for months. It's the least I can do. She didn't think about it again until she got home and looked at what she'd made that day. Not a fortune, but enough to cover the testing groceries for the next 2 weeks. She went home and wrote an essay about the market, about the man with the library bag, about the tomato jam, and what it meant to make something that connected a widower to his late wife's memory. She posted it that night without overthinking it. It was shared 9,000 times by the following Tuesday. That was when the email arrived. It came from a commissioning editor at Harlow & Reed, one of the larger publishers with a Canadian lifestyle division headquartered in Toronto. The subject line said simply, "Your work, potential conversation?" Clara read it 3 times standing in her kitchen, still in her coat from walking the dog, before she sat down slowly on the floor. They had found her through the essay. The editor had been following the blog for months. They were looking for a cookbook author. Something personal and rooted, Canadian seasons, home cooking without pretension. They thought her voice was exactly what they hadn't been able to find elsewhere. Would she be open to a call? Clara called Fiona instead, right then before she responded to anything. "Fiona. What happened?" "Nothing bad. I need you to tell me I'm reading this correctly." She read the email aloud. Her voice shook slightly the whole way through. Fiona was quiet for 3 full seconds. "Clara, oh my God. It might be nothing." "It is not nothing. Publishers reach out to people all the time and nothing comes of." "Clara, stop," reply to the email. The call happened the following Thursday. By the end of it, there was a formal offer on the table, a 2-book deal, an advance more generous than Clara had made in any single year of her marriage, plus royalty terms the editor described as fair and genuinely meant. She signed the contract on a Friday afternoon in a lawyer's office on Bay Street, her hands steady, her chest doing something she didn't have a word for. 2 months later, Harlow & Reed's publicity team put her on CBC's national morning broadcast. A cooking segment live, with the blueberry compote and a new recipe she developed for the book. She was calm on camera in the way she hadn't expected to be. She talked about her grandmother, the market, the man with the library bag. The anchor laughed at a story about a failed soufflé. The segment ran 6 minutes over the scheduled time. The publisher's post went to 300,000 impressions by evening. Across the city, in a restaurant on King Street West where Julian Mercer was having a client lunch, a colleague sitting across from him held up her phone. "Julian, isn't that your—" He looked at the screen. The CBC clip was looping on his colleague's phone. Clara was smiling, easy and warm in a kitchen that wasn't their kitchen. The chyron along the bottom read, "Clara Whitmore, a Canadian table, book release, fall 2026. "She wrote a book?" the colleague said. Julian set down his fork. He didn't speak for the rest of the lunch. He drove home with the radio off. He sat in his car outside his apartment building in Liberty Village, the 1-bedroom he'd moved into after leaving. The one he paid too much for and had never quite managed to feel comfortable in. And thought about the flour on her hands. The apple chutney. The way she'd been standing at the counter the last time things had been anything close to good. He told himself it didn't matter. By morning, he'd decided to call her. The number he had was disconnected. He tried Fiona's number and she picked up in 3 rings. "Don't," Fiona said, before he'd gotten further than his own name. "I just want to talk to her." "She doesn't want to talk to you, Julian." "She didn't say that." "She changed her number, that's her saying it." A pause. "I'm going to hang up now. Please don't call this number again." "She did." He tried her publisher's contact page, left a message that felt ridiculous even as he was typing it. He reached out through a mutual friend who declined to pass along any information. He sent a card to their old address, not knowing where else to send it, and it came back unopened. Clara had built walls efficiently and thoroughly, the way a person does when they've had enough time to think clearly about what they want and what they don't. What Julian didn't know, what he was about to discover the hard way, was that the rest of his life was also quietly disassembling itself without her. Kristen, as it turned out, had been conducting a parallel situation with her director at the PR firm, a man named Derek who owned a house in Forest Hill and took his winters in Portugal. When it became useful for her to make a choice between Julian and Derek, she made it with the efficiency of someone who had been running the numbers all along. "It's not personal," she told Julian on a Tuesday evening, in the tone of someone who understood perfectly well that it was entirely personal, and simply didn't find that relevant. "You've been seeing him this whole time?" I've been seeing possibilities, she said. You stopped being one. Julian moved out of her apartment 3 weeks later. He had been staying there quietly for several months, which he'd told himself at the time was practical, and found himself paying first and last on a new place with a credit card he was already carrying a balance on. His firm restructured in the spring. His position wasn't eliminated, but was reclassified, which is the corporate way of saying this thing while keeping the legal exposure down. His income dropped by a third. The car payment, the new lease, the credit card, the loan he'd co-signed for Kristen's car lease, which she had stopped servicing, as he discovered from a collections call. All of it began to feel less like manageable adult expenses and more like a set of hands pressing down on him from several directions simultaneously. He thought about Clara every day. Not the Clara he'd categorized and dismissed. He thought about the Clara who was up before the sun, who talked to the dog while she cooked, who left soup in the fridge without mentioning it, because she knew he'd come home too tired to make dinner. He thought about how consistently and quietly good she had been, and how consistently he had looked at that goodness and seen only what it was not. He told himself he just wanted to apologize. He was not entirely lying to himself. He was not being entirely honest with himself either. It was November when he saw the listing for her book launch, a public event at Indigo on Bloor Street, 6 o'clock, doors at 5:30, signing to follow. He went. He stood near the back of the room while a genuine crowd gathered, not a massive one, but the kind that arrived specifically and deliberately. People who had taken the subway into the city, who held the book with both hands, who had dog-eared pages of recipes they'd already tested at home. He watched Clara at the signing table, talking to readers with an ease that looked exactly the same as it always had, and somehow completely different. When the formal part ended, a line formed. Julian joined it. He stood in line for 22 minutes. The woman ahead of him asked Clara to personalize 3 copies, one for each of her daughters. The man behind him carried a canvas bag from a public library. Julian noticed this and felt something without quite knowing what to call it. When he reached the table, Clara looked up. She recognized him immediately. Her expression didn't collapse or recoil. It simply settled into something clear and a little tired, the look of a woman who had already worked through this exact moment and knew precisely what she was going to do. "Julian," she said. "Hey." The word was completely inadequate and he knew it as he said it. "I wanted to see you. I've been trying to reach you. No. I wanted to tell you in person that I was wrong." His voice came out less steady than he'd intended. "About everything I said. About the blog, about your work, about what you were building. I was wrong and I was unkind and I'm started again. I'm sorry, Clara. I'm genuinely sorry." She was quiet for a moment. Someone shifted in the line behind him. "I know you are," she said. "I believe that you mean it." Something in him rose toward hope. "I spent a long time," Clara continued, her voice level and almost gentle, which reached him more directly than anger ever could have, "feeling like what I made wasn't worth very much. Like I had to justify it to you every time I sat down to work. Like the way I understood value and the way you understood value were so different that one of us had to be wrong." She looked at him steadily. "It took me a while to understand that you weren't just wrong about my blog. You were wrong about me. About what I was worth and what I deserved, and what a person who loves you actually does when things get hard." Julian said nothing because there was nothing to say. "I don't hate you," she said. "I'm not here to make you feel worse than you already do, but I'm also not able to give you what you're looking for tonight, because what you're looking for is a door I've already closed. Not out of bitterness, just out of clarity." She reached across the table and picked up her pen. "Is there someone I can sign this for?" she asked, as though this was simply what came next. Julian looked down at the book in his hands. He had picked it up near the entrance before joining the line, without quite deciding to. He thought about saying something more. He thought about asking for more time, more conversation, more of anything she might be willing to give. He thought about the apartment he'd walked out of in March, and how she had never once, in all the months since, asked him to come back. "Just your name is fine," he said. She signed it, her name clean and certain on the title page. He walked out into the November cold on Bloor Street with the book under his arm, and the bookstore windows warm and lit behind him. He stood on the pavement for a moment, and then he started walking north, and he did not look back at the windows, not once. Inside, Clara Whitmore signed another book, and then another, and answered a question about cardamom from a woman in a yellow coat, and laughed at something Nuss said about the blueberries on the cover, and moved through the rest of the evening, with the particular ease of a woman who has discovered she was right about herself all along, and no longer needs anyone else's confirmation to be certain of it. If this story stayed with you, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below, Would you have given Julian a second chance? Or would you have turned the page too? Subscribe to Lost Soul Stories TV for more stories like this one. Because sometimes the most remarkable lives belong to the people no one thought to watch carefully enough.